Good afternoon and welcome to the People's Verdict. I'm your usual host, Patrick Soko, and today I've been joined in the studio by the Southern Africa Center for the Constructive Resolution of Dispute Executive Director, Mr. BONIFACE CHEEMBE. Together we'll be discussing redefining the Public Order Act. You too, our dear viewers, can send in your messages on our social media platform in case you want to contribute to the program. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Soko. Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to our viewers.
How is SACCORD?
SACCORD is very fine. Busy, of course, with a national issue at hand for which we've been invited here to discuss in a little bit more detail. That is the Public Order Act. Of course, that alongside other related democracy, peace and governance matters that are affecting the nation. We are fine and basically interacting with the rights as well as the duty bearers of the nation.
We are hosting you for the first time on the People's Verdict, and there are some of our viewers who may not be aware what SACCORD does and what is your mandate, especially when it comes to national governance.
Right. Well, first and foremost, Mr. Soko, thank you for hosting us on Camnet TV. It's a privilege and an honor to be here. Almost everyone at SACCORD does follow Camnet, and to be able to interact with the audience that you have, it's something that we don't take lightly. So thank you so very much. Indeed, we are coming here for the very first time. And obviously, we are coming from an institution that is wholly Zambian based, called Southern African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes. Mouthful, but SACCORD in short. An organization that was formed in 1999 and officially registered in 2000 under the laws of Zambia to promote peace and democracy in Zambia and the Southern African region. The formation of the organization was motivated by what a few Zambian scholars, activists, and researchers saw whilst on tour of duty in a small Far East Asian country called East Timor, under the auspices of the United Nations Peacekeeping Mission. Whilst there, they saw the horrors that come along with war, bloodshed, deaths, damage to public as well as private property, gross human rights violations. And whilst there, they asked themselves a very simple question: what is it that we can do to prevent the kind of horrors that we've witnessed in this particular part of the world? So the idea of SACCORD was formed to contribute as much as possible to matters pertaining to peace and also democracy within our very own country, but also the Southern African region. To that effect, since our formation, we have been operating under 5-year strategic plans, and all of them, when formulated, simply seek to promote that very mandate for which the organization was formed. Currently, we are operating under our 2019 to 2024 strategic plan, and under the plan we've got 3 key program areas that preoccupy us in terms of promoting peace and democracy. The first one is called the Peace Building and Conflict Prevention Program. So this is the program area where we deal with all issues pertaining to peace, conflict resolution, management, transformation, and the likes. The second key program area that we have is called the participation, accountability, transparency program, and this is the program area where we deal with issues of citizen participation and ultimately trying to ensure that there is as much accountability in our nation as possible, especially where duty bearers are concerned, but also rights holders by and large. The third and last key program area that we have is called the Human Rights and Access to Justice program. So this is where we deal with all issues pertaining to the observance, protection, as well as promotion of human rights. Of course, we are a national organization. Our secretariat here in Lusaka, headed by myself, the executive director, and I'm assisted by different departments, such as the programs department headed by my programs manager, the admin department headed by my admin manager, the accounts department headed by my accounts manager, and we've got officers that operate under these departments. I'm directly responsible to the board of SACCOD, which currently consists of 6 board members. In the rest of the country, we are represented by 10 provincial coordinators. Each province has got a provincial coordinator. Under each province, we have constituency coordinators who coordinate the work of the organization. At the constituency level, at the district level, we have a district coordinator who coordinates the work of the organization at the district level. And at the very lowest level, the community level, we will have what we call community action groups that implement SACCOD programs on behalf of Secretariat. Of course, beyond the borders of this country, because we've got a regional niche, you will find that we have networking partners through whom we work in different parts of the country, of the continent, starting from the way down south all the way up north. For example, we are the chairperson of the COMESA program on peace and security. So we've got partner organization with whom we work. We are the national chairperson for the International Conference of the Great Lakes region from a civil society point of view. We are equally work with various organizations in the Great Lakes region, and very soon we shall be holding our general assembly specifically for the Great Lakes region for civil society. I must hasten to mention where SACCOD is also the vice chairperson of the International Conference of the Great Lakes region CSO forum. So at the regional level, we work through partner organizations, but at the country level, those are the structure that we have, and currently we have in the excess of about 6,000 members as an organization. Initially, SACCOD was not a paid-up membership outfit. We underwent a review of our governance documents last year, and the SACCOD membership did approve a revised constitution where they have given a provision for paid-up membership. So this is who we are as an organization, and our mandate is to contribute and participate in the promotion of peace and democracy in Zambia as well as the Southern African region. So in a nutshell, that is who we are as SACCOD.
Interesting, quite an in-depth in terms of the introduction about what SACCOD is all about. And in case you are just joining us, our dear viewers, you have not missed much because we are just getting deep into this conversation. And my guest is the Executive Director for SACCOD, Mr. BONIFACE CHEEMBE. And we are discussing the Public Order Act, which as a country we are trying to redefine. Now, Mr. CHEEMBE, to get into our conversation, I want to pick on your perspective regarding this interesting issue pertaining to the Public Order Act. Yeah. Why do we really need to review the Public Order Act?
Well, thank you so very much, Mr. Soko. We need to review the Public Order Act because we are in the third decade of the 21st century, where issues of fundamental human rights are protected and are held in extremely high esteem. No one can survive without the fundamental freedoms of association and assembly. And to that extent, international laws and conventions do protect these fundamental freedoms, starting with our very own constitution in the country. If you go to Article 11 of the Constitution, to Article 20 as well as 21 of our Republican Constitution, these fundamental rights of association and assembly are provided for and guaranteed by the supreme law of the land. Beyond that, our African Charter of Human Rights equally does protect and provide for the freedoms of association and assembly. Similarly, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights under Article 20 does provide for the promotion as well as protection of these fundamental freedoms. Now, if you look at the manner in which these fundamental freedoms are held and observed and respected the world over, it is quite encouraging. And if you look at the manner in which we have been grappling as a country, especially when it comes to the administration of the Public Order Act, a lot of concerns have been raised in that different stakeholders have complained, from civil society to political society to trade unions, the academia, senior citizens, general citizens, among other stakeholders, including the media, must point out, have complained that, look, we are in a democracy, but the manner in which we enjoy our fundamental rights of association and assembly is not satisfying. And there are many examples to show in this particular regards. And in the worst forms or worst cases, we have seen people lose lives. We have seen damage to public as well as private property on account of the Public Order Act. Now, the current Public Order Act of the Republic of Zambia was enacted in 1955. And the current Zambian population, very few were or had been born by then. So it brings into question a couple of things. One, how many Zambians, if any, participated in the formulation of a piece of legislation whose initial and sole purpose or mandate was to prevent the indigenous people of this country from enjoying their freedom of association as well as assembly, so that the country could gain independence. So none, if any, Zambian ever participated in understanding or in putting forward the model of public order that we must have in our country, because the law that we currently have was there to actually stop us from enjoying those basic freedoms. So once we gained independence and when we transitioned back to multipartism in 1991, so from 1964, 1991, 96 to date, very few aspects of the Public Order Act have actually been changed, and even in efforts where our courts of laws have made it very clear. So for example, when it comes to the enjoyment of freedoms, there are two options that are normally available for citizens. One option is that you give a notification, and on the basis of that notification, once it is received, it forms a legal basis for you to actually proceed to enjoy your fundamental freedoms of association and assembly. But also in other instances, we have, or there is, what is called an authorization regime, whereby you cannot proceed to enjoy these freedoms if you don't get authority or approval for you to proceed. So in 1996, so our Public Order Act was an authorization regime. You needed to get approval in order for you to proceed with the enjoyments of these freedoms. In 1996, there was a Supreme Court ruling in what was referred to Christine Mulundika versus the people, where the Constitutional Court, or the Supreme Court, actually ruled that the aspect under Section 5 of the current Public Order Act, where it stated that people needed to get a permit in order for them to enjoy their fundamental freedoms of association and assembly, were a direct violation of the Constitution and other international laws as well as conventions. Therefore, the Supreme Court actually guided that what we need, and the only thing that the people need to do in this country in order to enjoy these freedoms, fundamental freedoms, is to simply put forward a notification. And a notification does not require you to get a yes or no answer. It does not require you to get an approval. In other words, a notification is not synonymous to an authorization regime. However, there has been a perception from 1996, even after the Supreme Court ruling, in addition to an appeal case involving the Law Association of Zambia, among other stakeholders, that happened in 2014, where even the courts of laws there made it very clear that in this country you don't need a permit, you actually need a notification. And upon giving that notification, and upon the law enforcement agencies receiving that notification, it is a very good and strong legal basis for you to proceed with your procession. So we've had the courts of laws guide in this country. However, there has been a perception that somehow the police under the law have the powers to either say or say yes or no to you as you seek to enjoy your freedom. So there has been this confusion of permit, which of course is a colonial mindset and has not been fully transformed yet. So we need to reform the Public Order Act by way of doing a couple of things which were not done to the current Public Order Act. One, ensure that there is greater ownership by the people of Zambia in coming up with a piece of legislation where they will determine first and foremost the model of public order that they want to have, number one. Number two, the kind of values that ought to guide them as they get a new piece of legislation that will meet their expectations as well as aspirations where the desire of freedom of association as well as assembly are concerned. Number two, we need a new public order so that the acrimony, the disunity, the discord, the conflict that the current Public Order Act has given to this nation in view of the many instances where various stakeholders have been prevented from enjoying their freedoms become a thing of the past, and ultimately that we put in place a piece of legislation that becomes a source of harmony, a source of unity, and above all and most critically a source of peace and development. And the idea is that as a country we do not backtrack in as far as the enjoyment of fundamental freedoms are concerned, but rather we are progressive and ultimately we live up to the modern times, the third decade of the 21st century, where Zambia is a sovereign state and it needs to move away from any aspects of colonialism, which of course, yes, bring about a trauma, but most critically where democracy is concerned tends to be a very big hindrance of the extent to which our people are able to enjoy their fundamental freedoms.
Now, Mr. Cheembe, I would want to bring to your attention important aspects of the Public Order Act. One of the arguments by the Zambia police has been that, for instance, as a political party, you do not need to be in an area where the president is also having his meeting. If we recall, under the previous regime, the police would say, because we have the responsibility to protect the president, so probably your activity may be intruding on activities of the president or may be threatening the life of the president. So hence you need to notify us, and you don't need to be in that locality. But what are you recommending in that aspect? Yeah,
well, we are taking a holistic approach towards the Public Order Act review. Clearly, there is something terribly wrong with the current law. Now, here, with specific response to your question, here's the issue. The current Public Order Act was formed to protect the governors. Okay? In other words, it was protect to have a power imbalance that favors those who govern at the expense to those who are being governed. And that culture has been adopted. And the explanation that you have just given in terms of that which has been brought forward by the Zambia Police Service is a typical example of just how much power imbalance the current Public Order Act created between the duty bearers and the rights holders. Now, if you follow the history of this country and you follow instances where the Public Order Act was actually faced challenges or maladministration, if you will, these occurrences took place mostly during the time of elections, number one, or mostly during times of political tension. What stakeholders that we have consulted and what most stakeholders have submitted is that, look, yes, we respect our head of state, and yes, we respect our leaders. Fine. Where you don't have elections going on, you can have some exemption for the president, or maybe for the vice president. However, during times of elections, this exemption must be done away with, because it has been used to create a very unfair playing ground that oftentimes disadvantages the opposition, or oftentimes disadvantages those who may hold a contrary view to those who are, or those who govern at a given time. In other words, those who may hold a dissenting democratic view that is legitimate may not be allowed to enjoy their freedom of association and assembly based on the exemption that the head of state may be given, especially during election time. So we've had two different submissions on this issue that you've asked, Mr. Soko. Some stakeholders were categorical that in the current democratic modern dispensation, there ought not to be no exemption for anybody, including the president. Okay? Now,
why is that, Mr. Chairman?
Because Zambia is a democratic state. And maybe just to explain this a little bit, when you look at public order models in the world, they are on a spectrum of two extremes. On one extreme, there is what we call the liberal model. The liberal model that states that if you want to enjoy your freedom of association and assembly, you can protest at any time. On the other extreme end, there is what we call the restricted model. With the restricted model, you actually need permission in order for you to enjoy your freedoms of association and assembly. And then in the middle ground, it's a hybrid of an aspect of restriction and an aspect of the liberal model. So those who subscribe and those who believe that the liberal model is good for this country, because once it is in place, you will reduce the extent to which politicians and quote-unquote politicians actually manipulate the Public Order Act so that it advantages them over the rest, or those who are in power are advantaged vis-a-vis those who are in opposition or those who hold dissenting views. Therefore, in an effort to ensure that no room is given to politicians to manipulate the situation, everybody ought to be exempted from being subjected to the nobody ought to be exempted from being subjected to the Public Order Act. So that's the rationale for those who say there ought not to be any exemptions for anyone in this country. Those who hold a middle ground and who believe that, look, you still need a little bit of restrictions. However, democratic restrictions that are accountable and that do not impede on the extent and in the manner that you enjoy your fundamental rights to association as well as assembly. Those are the ones who say, fine, okay, yes, in situations where we're not holding elections, perhaps the president may be exempted. However, during election time, in an effort to ensure that we create a level playing field for all, and that the issue of timing, where you have just stated that the president is arriving, meanwhile you've already done all your groundwork, and therefore you have to stop so that you pave way for someone else on account of timing. They are arguing that, look, election times must ensure that everyone is exempted, or no one is exempted from being subjected to the Public Order Act. So one of the solutions that has been arrived at to address the concern that you have put forward and the issue that exemplifies just how this legislation was formed to protect the governed at the expense, governors rather, at the expense of the governed, is that during election time, they ought to be very specific. The new Public Order Act must be very clear that during election times, the president or any other senior government official ought not to be exempted, or ought not to be exempted from being subjected to the Public Order Act.
But the aspect of notification, do you still consider that under the recommendations?
Absolutely. If you look at the views and the submissions that we have received from pretty much everywhere in the country, they are in line with the best practice that has been provided for by the African Charter on Human Rights, that notification is a best and most reliable and desired method of people enjoying their fundamental rights of association as well as assembly, and not an authorization regime. So almost everyone is agreeable. There is no dispute or dissent that we ought to stick to notification. However, even with notification, there are certain issues that we need to sort out. One of the biggest challenges that the current Public Order Act has faced is that you require to submit your notification 7 days before a procession. And we have seen a situation whereby the Zambia Police Service can come to you even 1 hour before a notification and say, no, you cannot proceed. So the biggest concern of stakeholders is that the new law must be very clear, and there must be accountability that once you give a notification in good time, you follow all the laid down procedures. No more should we have situations whereby somebody comes 30 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 hour before a procession, because that has been a serious source of conflict. People invest huge amount of resources, energy to plan for these events, and you cannot come and disrupt them 30 minutes or 1 hour before an election. Stakeholders want to have a very clear provision in the act, that the new act, that in the event that there are any issues that are legitimate for the law enforcement agencies or the relevant authorities to prevent a procession from taking place, they must provide an alternative within a number of days. Stakeholders have stipulated different days, but they must provide an alternative within a stipulated amount of time so that you are not prevented from enjoying your fundamental freedoms of association as well as assembly in perpetuity or indefinitely.
Interesting. So now I also want to understand that when we are talking about the Public Order Act, quite an issue, especially pertaining to the general election. We've been talking about this for a long time now, Mr. CHEEMBE. You haven't been, especially in the governance circles. You understand that our efforts in the past to revise this law or these legislations have not yielded positive results. How confident are you this time around that we'll make progress as a country?
I think that's a great question, Mr. Soko. That's a great question. And your question really borders on how we need to change our political culture as a country. We are quite fortunate, I must say, that 4 years before a general election, we have a situation where the government has informed the people that, look, give us views on how you'd want your new Public Order Act to be 4 years before a general election. Oftentimes in the past, we have seen a situation whereby the finalization of the law reform as regards the Public Order Act, or the momentum to finalize the law reform as regards to the Public Order Act, takes place a few months before a general election, maybe 6 months or 1 year before a general elections. What that has tended to do is to politicize our legal reforms in our country. Politicize in the sense that when you are asking stakeholders to come forward and put their submissions, because the environment is already faced in an election with an electioneering mode, some people may be fearful to go and submit. Maybe they are civil servants. Some people may be fearful to submit, maybe because of reprisals or potential reprisals. So you have a situation whereby even the professional input into the reform process is curtailed, is hindered by fear that whatever you say, whatever you do, will be perceived in a particular political lens or in a particular partisan lens, such that even when the deliberations to actually actualize, finalize, and enact a new law comes about, people develop cold feet and politics takes over, and before you know it, there is total disunity. So we are happy that we now have an opportunity to work around the reform of the Public Order Act 4 years before a general election. And what this has done from a SACCORD observation, after going around the country soliciting for these submissions from stakeholders in terms of what they would want to see done, is to free up the mind, where people are not fearful, people are giving very professional input into the reform process, people are honest, people are practical, people are genuine in terms of what they would want to see. And there are no politics involved because it's 4 years before a general elections. So the environment is very conducive. That's number one. Number two, what has helped even in this particular reform of the Public Order Act is that there is a very clear time frame. There is a start date and there is an end date, very clearly. And fortunately, both the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Zambia Law Development Commission are following that time frame almost religiously, if I may add. And this is commendable because what we must do is to finalize any law reform within a given time frame. If it procrastinates, it goes beyond a certain time frame, it becomes difficult. So our expectation as SACCORD is that we will certainly, and we hope to have a new piece of legislation within a year or two, and leave 3 years between a year or two, so that at least we have 3 years before we start going into politicking and electioneering as regards the 2026 general election. So there's a very clear time frame for us to conclude on this matter of the Public Order Act. And again, that motivates our people. That is extremely helpful. The third issue that has been important in terms of this particular process is that not only have the citizens been told, please come forward and make your submissions, other things, other products that were arrived at or that we came up with as a country in the past are equally being considered. So for example, there was the National Dialogue Forum, and one of the products that came out of the National Dialogue Forum was a draft bill on the Public Order Act, or rather a draft bill on public order. And that draft 2019 draft bill on public order is equally being considered in this current process. So the approach is very holistic, is inclusive, is all-encompassing, and has not thrown out anything that may make a certain group or section of society say, look, we are not being heard, we are being disregarded, we are being excluded. And that's very important. If you need to ensure that there is legitimacy in a law reform, be inclusive and ensure that there is as much participation from stakeholders as possible. And once you have that, there is legitimacy, number one. Number two, it equally goes a long way in strengthening our quality and also level of our participatory democracy as a country. So the question that you pose is extremely important because it brings into the picture a total political transformation from what we've been doing in the past, waiting until elections to attend to legal reforms. It hasn't worked and it has contributed to failure. We now have an opportunity to do things many years before a general election, and with the Public Order Act, from a SACCORD assessment, we are extremely hopeful that it will come to pass. Now, another aspect of the question that you have posed is that the government of the day must be receptive, they must be listening, and they must act on the voices of the people. We hope that with the amount of efforts, amount of energy that have been expended, it would be extremely unfortunate if the UPND government was to develop cold feet and not enact a new Public Order Act. We are almost 100% certain that they will do the right thing. And again, if they listen to the voices and do the right thing, the results will be a foregone conclusion. A very important motivation into the people of Zambia, that when they speak, their voice is heard, and that when they put across issues, their voices, their issues will be taken on board. When they put across their concerns, those concerns will be addressed. And that's the kind of democracy that we need. And in our view, doing things many years before a general elections has got the potential to bring about that kind of democracy where people feel that they are being listened to, and whatever it is that is being done, it is in their best possible interest, but also in the interest of the country, as opposed to it being in the interest of a partisan grouping and in the interest of a narrow group of individuals, as it were.
Well, our dear viewers, you are watching The People's Verdict with me, Patrick Soko, your host, and my guest, Mr. BONIFACE CHEEMBE. He is the SACCORD Executive Director, and we are discussing redefining the Public Order Act. It has been a contentious issue for a long time in the Zambian political scene, and year in, year out, we continue to discuss how this law has been unfairly applied, especially against the opposition political parties. The current administration has been the victim of the Public Order Act on several occasions, and they have complained. And we have seen that now we have a roadmap towards reforming this piece of legislation. In case you also wanted to add your views or your perspective on our topic of discussion, you can do so by sending us that text message on the number that is on your screen, as well as on our social media. This has been our Facebook page. You can leave us a message or ask our guest any question you'd want him to respond to. Then we'll be able to beam it on the screen. Now, going forward, Mr. CHEEMBE, I also wanted to get your perspective on other matters that are topical pertaining to the electoral process and governance in general. That's pertaining to dispute resolution, which is your major responsibility as an organization. Even talking about the Public Order Act, I understand that your major concern is dispute resolution, because this Public Order Act has brought a lot of violence. So we have seen political violence because political parties cannot agree to be in one position because they hold divergent views. They do not want to meet each other, so they end up fighting, and that, like you explained in your preamble, brings about a conflict which is not good for the country, because it has a ripple effects on many aspects of our development as a country. Now, let's look at the aspect of conflict resolution intra-political parties. We have seen that most of our political parties, Mr. CHEEMBE, have taken each other to court now. I want you to give me your perspective on how we can resolve political issues. First of all, we start on an intra-political aspect, where we see this political party having two factions. When they take each other to court, you'd find that a case would drag up to the day of the general election. But is that good for our democracy?
Yes. You see, in any democratic society, there are three arms of government: the executive, the legislature, as well as the judiciary. The judiciary is extremely important when it comes to the peaceful resolution or management of conflicts, because it is a go-to place where people can present their issues, and the judiciary, depending on the merits and the demerits of the evidence that is brought before it, peacefully adjudicates in terms of what is to be done, or guide in terms of the way forward, as it were. So the fact that our people, including political parties, opt to go to the judiciary to resolve their differences in a peaceful manner is an indicator of the amount of confidence that they have in our established institutions for them to be able to resolve their differences peacefully as well as amicably. Mr. Soko, in countries where people do not have confidence in their established institutions to resolve their differences, the only way out is the streets. And when you have the streets to resolve your differences, what you tend to see is a civil strife, civil conflicts or civil wars, and much more harm being done. From a SACCORD point of view, it is good that the courts of laws are being used to adjudicate over matters peacefully. Now, that said, we are peace builders. Okay, so there are advantages, there are also disadvantages that come along with the courts of laws. In terms of disadvantages, the courts of laws do not pay attention on how to build and mend relationships. Okay, it's all about making a decision that must be respected and must be final. It ends there, no matter how long it takes. So there is no component or aspect of reconciliation when you use the courts of laws. There is no component or aspect of relationship building when you use the courts of laws. In other words, the courts of laws system is much more adversarial. And when you come to SACCORD and we begin to use our peace building lenses, we would always want to propose that, look, aside from the retributive justice which uses the courts of laws, there is another form of justice that we call restorative justice. And through restorative justice, you can actually resolve your differences peacefully and amicably, as long as you are willing and as long as you are able to sit down, dialogue, and interact through face-to-face interaction that helps humanize those who are involved in a certain conflict and a certain grievance. And once you use the restorative justice process, you are able to provide for much more greater reconciliation. You are able to ensure that there is a humanization process that takes place, which oftentimes does not happen if you're using the court system, because you dehumanize one another because it's an adversarial system. And when you don't resolve your issues behind closed doors through dialogue, and oftentimes, as we would see in terms of some of the intra-party conflicts or differences, what you tend to see, especially when those are through the public and through the media, is that a dehumanization process would take place. So there are certain advantages in terms of the court process that you can point out to, among them being that, look, our people have got confidence in our established institutions to resolve their differences. There are also disadvantages in that if your interest is to ensure that there is reconciliation, there is a building of relationships by way of restoring trust, there is a humanization process that takes place, there is an alternative, a restorative justice system, which we as SACCORD would encourage to be much more of an alternative that our political parties should be able to undertake, as much as they would also want to use the route of established institutions. Ultimately, what is important is for everyone to be able to decide what it is that is good for them and what it is that they prefer. But when you ask SACCORD in terms of what the preference would be, we would certainly encourage restorative justice because it is much more humane in our view, and it builds much more greater peace, harmony, unity, as well as reconciliation in terms of the aggrieved or warring parties, as it were. So yes, we do have a problem of many intra-party differences, and yes, it is true that most of those are behind or before the courts of laws. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Our only concern is that we also need to focus much more on ensuring that there is a human face to all those involved in grievances and differences within political parties.
We also say that justice delayed is rather justice denied, Mr. CHEEMBE. And in this case, we look at these court cases dragging for a long period. But isn't there a system we can work on as a country, or try to reform our judiciary to ensure that cases are able to be attended to quickly and disposed of within a short period of time? Because we're also looking at, for instance, the aspect of election petitions that we witnessed. Okay. And all these cases drag, but while they are dragging, these members of parliament need to be working, knowing that to say, my case was done away with, as opposed to when you are working, you may say, okay, a judgment is coming, or you are being interrupted. You are thinking to say, what would be the way forward on my case, all those issues. Yeah.
No, you are certainly right, Mr. Soko. Our judicial system currently has some weaknesses, and we are quite fortunate, and I think it's good that our Ministry of Justice has been able and has been honest in admitting that there are weaknesses in our judicial system, number one. Number two, that certainly we need to undertake judicial reforms to be able to attend to many aspects that contribute to what you have just stated. Justice delayed is justice denied. And some of those things border on ensuring that we've got the right infrastructure in terms of our judicial system, both in terms of human resource, but also in terms of the actual physical establishment in our nation. But a component to that again relates on the colonial pieces of legislation that we have, ensuring that we have laws that are up to date, that are not colonial in nature, and that are in tandem with the increasing Zambian population that is in constant need and demand for justice. So we have judicial weaknesses that require deliberate deliberate efforts to be worked on, and that need to, and we don't have time to we don't have time to delay working on these reforms. They're an urgent matter. So I couldn't agree more. We've got weaknesses. Those weaknesses have to be attended to, and it's good that the Ministry of Justice has come out very honestly and openly on this matter. This is why there are things happening in terms of consideration for the reform of the penal code. There are consideration in terms of establishing or ensuring that we've got an adequate establishment in terms of the human resource, but also of the infrastructure, in terms of our judicial system, because clearly the extent and the manner in which we have got an effective justice system equally speaks volumes in terms of the quality of our democracy and the extent to which our people believe that we've got justice and fairness in our republic.
Oh, well, in case you're just joining us, you're watching the People's Verdict, and we are discussing various issues now pertaining to the national governance, and a key to it is redefining the Public Order Act. And I also wanted to find out another aspect, Mr. CHEEMBE, from your organization, because we understand that the people of Kwacha and Kabushi constituencies will be going to vote, and how important is the need to uphold peace, especially during this election, and how the ECZ can improve its conflict resolution mechanisms, because we saw it being tested during the Kawata by-election, where when we saw the DP issue coming into play, who is going to file in the nomination and everything, but how can the ECZ work on its conflict resolutions, and also working with you as stakeholders in the electoral process as well?
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Soko. I think first and foremost, we need to attend to our supreme law of the land in terms of the lacunas that exist, that have a potential to bring about civil strife in this country if we don't attend to them. Example, the Kawata example, Kawata constituency by-election example that you have cited is extremely important, because what transpired in terms of the nominations and the filing in, once one of the candidates pulled out, basically exposed our vulnerabilities in terms of the Constitution and the need for us to actually urgently act on it. And this is why as SACCORD we would like to see us conclude within the time frame that has been given by the authorities, the reform of the Public Order Act, so that with that we urgently and quickly move into reforming the Constitution, because once that is done, it goes a long way in helping the Electoral Commission of Zambia, where the management of peaceful elections are concerned, because they don't have to deal with laws that can potentially make it very difficult for the peace of this country to be maintained. But beyond the Constitution, a couple of things have to happen, Mr. Soko. We would like to first and foremost wish the people of Kabushi and the Kwacha constituencies all the best as they begin to prepare to elect their new representatives for the next few years. As political parties, political stakeholders, and indeed all other stakeholders begin to prepare for campaigns and ultimately for the vote in these two constituencies, and I must also add in the Ruangwa Council Chairperson by-election, it is absolutely important that our political players observe and adhere very strictly to our electoral laws. For example, the Electoral Process Act, the Electoral Code of Conduct, among others, because these are put in place to help with aspects of conflict prevention. These are put in place ultimately to ensure that we do not have any aspects of electoral irregularities, which oftentimes tend to form a basis for electoral petitions, and in the instances for why we are going back to these by-elections again, well, we are going to by-elections, form a basis for nullifications of seats. So it is important that they adhere to the electoral laws of the land. So that is one key basis for ensuring that peace prevails. Number two, the administration of the Public Order Act becomes handy. Everyone must be allowed to canvass for votes. Everyone must be allowed to enjoy their fundamental freedoms of association and assembly, because it is only when you associate and assemble that you are able to engage in a third related issue, that is an issue-based politics, an issue-based campaign, where you're able to sell your manifestos, where you're able to sell your ideas, where you're able to basically ensure that you market yourself on the basis of issues as opposed to anything else, such as political violence, as a basis upon which you should be elected into office. It is important that we respect the mental faculties of the people of Zambia, so that they are given an opportunity to peacefully elect their leaders from an informed point of view. So there has to be a fair administration of the Public Order Act, but also all political stakeholders must ensure that they stick to an issue-based campaigns that allow the people to make an informed decision. And in our view, once that is done, it becomes a lot easier to appeal to the citizens in these various constituencies that, look, on poll day, do come out en masse and exercise your right to vote, because there would have been a conducive environment that is devoid of political violence, which oftentimes tends to be human rights violation, especially they withdraw and they do not want to actually participate in the democracy and governance process of their country, which in and of itself becomes a source of conflict. So there are certain issues of responsibilities that our political stakeholders must focus on, and once everything is done, it becomes a foregone conclusion. Make an appeal to the electorate to come out, make an informed decision, and cast for the best individuals, best parties of their choice when the verdict is made. And once the results come out, ultimately it is expected that it will be a reflection of the people's wishes as well as desires.
Interesting. Mr. CHEEMBE, now before I let you go, I know we are coming towards the end of our discussion, but I want to also get your views regarding what is really the take home on the Public Order Act. First of all, we saw you earlier this week holding a stakeholders meeting. Have you also extended the same to political parties, or you have just limited your interventions amongst civil society organizations, the media, and others? What is the general perspective of the political parties based on your engagement on the Public Order Act?
Thank you, Mr. Soko. Maybe allow me to answer your question from this point of view. SACCORD, together with the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, or DCAF, in short, with support from the Embassy of Sweden in the Republic of Zambia, we have a project that seeks to improve regulation as well as oversight mechanisms over the management of public order in Zambia. So our stakeholders engagement and consultation that you have been able to witness happening around the country, including the last one that happened yesterday in Lusaka, these platforms have been created to afford different stakeholders, namely the media, the academia, the church, political parties, senior citizens, civil society organizations, and several other stakeholders who are affected, including trade unions, by the way, who are affected and who have been affected in one way or the other on account of the administration of the Public Order Act. So we have gone beyond or merely focusing on ourselves as civil society. We've got other colleagues who are focused strictly on civil society. We have said, why don't we expand this outreach to other stakeholders who matter in the manner in which the public order is done. So these stakeholders are key in terms of participation and ultimately giving the right legitimacy in whatever product that will come up with, and by so doing keep evidence or provide evidence to the quality of our participatory democracy. So the issue of law reform that we are currently doing, and the submission that we actually made yesterday to the Zambia Law Development Commission and the Ministry of Home Affairs, is but one component or aspect of our engagement on public order. Beyond this, public order requires continuous work. We need to ensure that once the law is put in place, the citizens are aware of the contents of that law. Number one. Number two, we need to ensure that once that the new law is put in place, the manner in which is administered is according to the wishes and the desires of the people of Zambia. So what we want to ensure is that we don't do ad hoc work, so to speak, as regards to matters of improving regulation and oversight in the management of public order in the country, but that we are methodical, we are strategic, and that we are consistent in ensuring that beyond the law reform aspect, there are other issues that we must be able to implement, so that issues of public order in this country, once they are being executed, they are done so in a manner that meets the wishes as well as the desires of the people of Zambia.
Thank you very much, Mr. CHEEMBE, for making it to the program. We hope you will make it when we call you next time.
We'll be at your service, Mr. Soko. We are extremely happy that you've been able to give us this platform. We hope that this is not the last time that you will extend an invitation to us, and when you do so, we will make ourselves available. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Well, our dear viewers, you've been watching the People's Verdict, and this is where we end today's program. Remember, as we say, we ask the questions while you make the verdict. My guest on the program has been SACCORD Executive Director, Mr. BONIFACE CHEEMBE, and we have been discussing redefining the Public Order Act. Until next time, this has been Patrick Soko. Keep it on Kame TV.